There are a lot of security products for WordPress. You have both free plugins that are available to where you can simply go to plugins and add new and search for them, and there are numerous security plugins available that way. But then there are also commercial plugins that are available, and ultimately this can cause a lot of confusion because you may be constantly changing your security plugin or trying multiple plugins all at the same time simply because you're not quite sure what they do and whether or not you need certain features. Well, I have a particular free plugin that I have found to be reliable, and it also doesn't seem to go overboard with doing too many things that you ultimately don't really need protection from. That plugin is a free WordPress plugin. It is called iThemes Security. You can actually search for this through plugins and add new and install this 100% for free. Now there is a pro version or a commercial version of iThemes Security, but let me stress this to you right now. Do not buy it. You do not need it. Everything that the free version will do for you is exactly what you want to have done. So with that said, don't be persuaded by extra features that you might see here and there. They're more or less good for certain situations, but the average WordPress user can get enough protection by both combining what iThemes Security offers and also my other recommendations that I've given you in other classes of this particular series, making sure you have up-to-date backups, customizing all of your passwords and your administrator account, making sure you're not using software that's going to leave you vulnerable. Combination of all this stuff together will keep you safe ultimately. And even if somebody happens to be able to slip through, you have those backups that you can always rely upon. So you don't want to overload your site with security software because number one, it can slow your site down very drastically. And also, it is quite common for people to lock themselves out of their own WordPress website because they're using too much security. So you're looking for a happy median in between those two that also gives you the option of restoring your website in the event that somebody does happen to be able to get through. Now once you have installed iThemes Security on your website and also activated it, you will see these two boxes up at the top talking about get a free API key for brute force network protection. You do not need this. This one where it says get free API key, just X this out and don't even worry about it. The other one, iThemes Security is almost ready. Secure your site now. This can be useful to use sometimes. I believe I've actually already accessed it on this site, so I don't know if it's going to bring it back up for me now. There are 3 points that this pop-up will bring you, the button that I just clicked. The first one is going to recommend that you back up your site. And the second one is going to recommend that you allow certain files to be writable on your website. And finally, the third option there is going to set some default values for this security plugin. There is a fourth thing that's on that list, but you really don't need to worry about that. That's giving anonymous information to the developers of the plugin. I would actually recommend not to do that fourth step. I really wanted to show you guys the screen that I was just talking about. So I wiped out the plugin and am starting over from scratch. I've gone onto plugins and add new. I've searched for iThemes security, and now I'm going to be installing this plugin. You can see it's used on more than 700,000 WordPress websites, and there are about 4.5-star reviews on it. So it's a well-received plugin. There are other options such as WordFence is another commonly used one. I actually do not like WordFence though. I find that it does too much. I have some suspicions about the fact that it might actually lead hackers to find your website more easily. And also, I've seen WordFence give false positives for security warnings too. So it really seems to be more trouble than it's worth. That's why I prefer iThemes Security. It's formerly known as Better WordPress Security. So I'm going to install this and get this activated on my site. There we go. Now I have these options back available for me. Again, I don't want to do the free API key, but I do want to go ahead and click this Secure Your Site Now option. Here we go. Here are the 4 options I was telling you about. Backup your site, allow file updates, secure your site, and then this is the anonymous data collection that you don't want to do. Now, with this said, it can still be useful to use this option that they have here. You could just click this button and it's going to make a backup for you and say that your backup is complete. Check your email or uploads folder on your website. That would be either your email address for your administrator account or your uploads folder, which is going to be wp-content/uploads. With that said though, I have seen some cases where either this backup is empty or possibly incomplete, just depending on what you have on your WordPress database. So I would not completely trust this backup feature. After you click on that option, go into your control panel and open up your file manager and also open up PHP admin. Within your file manager, find your public HTML directory, click on it, click on compress, and save a backup. You can even date it if you want to. Then click on compress files, and this is going to zip all of your public website files into a single backup, which will be located right here. So then you can download this and keep this as a backup. This is how you would be making a file backup of your site at any normal time. Now we want to do the same with the database, but we're going to do a database backup. We want to find our database for this particular website. We're going to click on it here so it opens up all of the tables in a listing. Then we're going to go over to export and click on go. Then we're going to save this file, this SQL file, to our computer. So now that gives us a file backup and a database backup. So if need be, if we mess anything up at this point, we can restore our entire website. So there's no possibility of messing anything up or losing anything that way. Now we can go back to the iThemes security plugin and we're going to continue. First, we can allow file updates. So go ahead and click on that. This is going to allow the plugin to be able to edit the WP config file and or the htaccess file. And finally, there is the secure your site option. Now we're going to click on this one-click secure, but then I'm going to go and revisit all the settings for this plugin because there are a few things I want to point out and talk to you about so you can really understand how all of this is working. And finally, there are a few other options that I find myself enabling in this plugin that do not get enabled from this one-click secure. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. Our site is now secured, and we can go ahead and close this down because again, we don't want to do this anonymous data collection. I'm going to go ahead and clear off the API key notice from the top two because I don't need that either. Now on this page, this is a dashboard. It tells you about file permissions, even though it will give you a couple of warnings right away for the WP config and the htaccess file. You actually don't want to worry about these right now. We can go back and reverse making these writable once we are done setting up everything on our site. Now, all the way down at the bottom, one other thing that is important to notice that is here is active lockouts. Any hosts or user accounts or even user names can be locked out of this website by this security plugin. If you ever have an issue of getting yourself locked out, as long as you have multiple admin accounts that you could potentially log in with, you might be able to come in and release the lockout. If for some reason you get 100% locked out of your website, I would recommend either restoring a backup from a previous time when the plugin was still active but you could access the site, or if need be, you can even restore your site back to before you were ever using the plugin. It just kind of depends on whether you've been adding content to your site since that time or not. Another option is potentially deleting the security plugin directly from your site. If you were to go into public HTML, WP content, plugins, and you see better WP security, if you completely delete this folder, you may be able to regain access to a site if you have gotten locked out of it by that plugin. If you get a bunch of errors when you delete that folder, try going into the public HTML backup that you made and look for the .htaccess file and also the wp-config.php file and restore just those two files to your website. Those couple of things can unlock and undo everything that this plugin has done. Now that again is more of a precautionary statement. The way that I recommend to use this plugin, it should hopefully prevent you from getting yourself locked out. However, if you decide to use certain options of the plugin, especially things that I either recommend against or may not specifically talk about in this training, it is possible to lock yourself out. One way to help prevent that, though, is by temporarily whitelisting your IP address. If you click on this button here, it's going to whitelist your IP address for 1 day. So for the next day, as long as you're accessing from the same IP address and the same computer essentially, then you shouldn't end up getting locked out from the website. Now I'm going to flip over to the Settings tab now. I want to talk about a few of the options that are available for you. First of all, once we are done configuring all of our settings for this plugin, we can choose whether or not to allow iThemes security to continue to write to these two files. Now personally, I end up leaving these files writable by the plugin after I'm done, because allowing it htaccess write capabilities, it can more easily ban people from your site that are trying to hack into it. So I find that to be valuable. I think it's worth the trade-off. Going down this page a little bit more, you have these notification emails that will get sent out to you when certain things are happening, such as backups being delivered to your email. It could also be notifications talking about people getting locked out of your website. If you find yourself getting a ton of those, you could disable the constant emails and just get a digest, which would send you like one per day talking about problems. That would help to reduce the number of emails that you get. You also have lockout messages that are happening. I actually prefer for this last one, the community lockout message, I don't like to let people know what security plugin I'm using. So I might just say buy this website instead of letting it specifically mention iThemes security. If hackers know your security plugin, they would at least be able to start figuring out what they can target and what they can't successfully. Going a little further down, we have lockouts. These lockouts, I like to prolong them just a little bit, especially if I do not have other users on this WordPress site. If it's just a site that I'm the only person logging into it, if I don't have other members basically, then I can have a really high lockout time here. And this just simply prevents people that are trying to maliciously do stuff on my site from being able to do it too frequently. Now going down a little bit more, you have a permanent lockout whitelist. I like to add my IP address to this particular list too. That just again helps to make sure that I don't get locked out of my own site. If you want to completely disable the email lockout notifications, which I often find myself wanting to do because you can get a lot of them if your site is actively being targeted, uncheck this box right here, and that will disable those email lockout notices. Continuing down this page, I don't usually recommend or find myself using any of these options here. I leave all them unchecked. One that can be useful to use though is this 404 detection. Now you have to think about, sometimes people might be using links to your site or something like that that's incorrect. If you ever yourself put, say, a broken image link on your own website, then you'll essentially be causing 404 errors. This is when somebody can't find the page or the resource that they are trying to get to on your site. It gives them a 404 error. Well, hackers will attempt a bunch of different known vulnerabilities on your WordPress website trying to get into it. And ultimately, when you don't have those vulnerabilities present, it's going to give them these 404 errors. So this is one particular way that you can actually lock people out of your website by accessing too many 404 error pages. And actually like to use this feature. I increase the number of minutes to remember the 404 error. I might make it 30 or even 60 minutes. The number of errors that somebody has to hit, this is a pretty high number, 20. So that means that within the course of an hour, somebody has to generate 20 404 errors. And then if it does, it will permanently lock them out from my website based on these settings. So I find this to be useful because, again, when people are looking for those vulnerabilities, they're going to be generating those 404 error pages. I don't recommend using the away mode. This will actually lock you out of your website at certain times of the day. Personally, I don't usually work on my sites at a very set time every single day, so I do like to leave my site open. However, let's say you work a job and you know for a fact that there's no possible reason you would want to access your site except for between certain hours. You could enable this away mode and set it up for those particular hours. But if there's any exception to that, let's say even if you had a problem with your site and you had to go and visit it at another time, you would not be able to get into your own website until that time frame came around. This is designed to help keep hackers out, but again, it's a little bit too much protection for my liking. Now I do like using this banned users option. This completely bans people from your site instead of just temporarily locking them out once they have reached a certain number of violations of these security rules. I like to enable this blacklist feature right here by checking this box and finally enabling the banning of users. So it'll start adding IP addresses and user agents to these two boxes here as the plugin works. So this limits the number of computers or IP addresses essentially that hackers will be able to use on your site as time progresses. And that should again limit their ability to be able to come after you. Under brute force protection, I don't want to receive these email updates, so I uncheck that. They talk about the power of the iThemes brute force protection. This is the network where you need like the API key, essentially. Talking about your API key once again here. I wouldn't give them your email. You'll probably end up getting advertised to that way. Again, this is not necessary. I actually like to use the local brute force protection, and I find this to be very sufficient. This local brute force protection is when people are trying to log into your website. You can, if they incorrectly guess their password a certain number of times within a certain time period, you can have it lock them out of the site. And if they do that too many times, it will permanently ban them from the site based on these settings and also these settings here. Now, I actually like to remember this for a longer time period. I set it at 60 minutes personally. I leave these two numbers the same. And I actually like using this feature too. However, I cannot currently enable it. It says automatically ban the admin username, but I'm still using that username. So I would have to go and change that before being able to enable this feature. So I'll come back to this in just a few. Further down the page, we have database backups. If you want automated backups, you want to check this box right here. Describe how you want your backup saved. I would recommend sending it to your email, but you could save locally and have it sent to email too. This is where your backups will be stored. These are the number of backups to retain on your local site. This is only if you use one of these local options. However, 0 is limitless, actually. You can see right here, setting to 0 will retain all backups. Finally, you have tables that you can include or exclude from the backups. These are the security tables. It's excluding those because those don't seem to be necessary, and it's the lockout information. It should help to ensure that you could get yourself back into your website. If you want this done on any kind of a regular basis automatically, you can enable the scheduled database backups and set the number of days. Now, how often you back up your site is completely up to you, and it really just depends on how often you update your site. If you update your site every single day, if you're making a couple new posts every day on it, by all means, back it up every day. But if you're only making an occasional update to your site, you could certainly set this for 30 days or even longer. That is quite okay to do. Now these other options, hide file change detection, or enable file change detection and enable hide backend feature, I do not use these, or malware scanning. If you have a SSL certificate on your site to where you can go to HTTPS, in the domain name to access your website, you may want to use these features. You can force SSL to be used on the back end or on the front end of your website if needed. I do like forcing users to use strong passwords, and this tells you the minimum role where you must choose a strong password. If you have anybody that is a member on your website that is not you, you're going to need to enable this to essentially force them to have a really strong password. Now this is where it really gets interesting. Down in System Tweaks, I actually like to use these top two options, protect my system files and also disable directory browsing. This helps to prevent people from trying to get into those files or trying to browse my files of my website to discover vulnerabilities. I also like to disable PHP in the Uploads folder. Going a little further down, I often find myself checking these first two options. In certain cases, if you are using the feed system in WordPress, whether it's incoming or outgoing in terms of trying to get your feed published elsewhere or publishing other website feeds on your own website, if you're using that kind of stuff, you may not want to select these options on these WordPress tweaks section. For everybody else, though, it's certainly okay to do, and actually I find to be really, really useful. XML RPC. This thing is a major source of WordPress hacks. This actually allows people to make guesses on your administrator password in bulk and remotely at that. I don't know why in the world this would even be thought of as being a good feature to include. It obviously does have its uses for certain situations. For example, this XML RPC is necessary for things like the Jetpack plugin, or if you want to have trackbacks or pingbacks happening on your site. That again is when this is necessary. For the average website though, these features simply allow an easy way for people to be able to attack your website. So I recommend disabling them. If you find that something on your site isn't working correctly, you could try coming back in and making some adjustments to this. For example, you can block the multiple authentication attempts feature of XML RPC, but you could still either leave it enabled entirely or just disable the pingbacks if you found that you did need some of these features. Now finally, one of the last things that I recommend to do is to disable a user's author page if their post count is 0. In a previous lesson, I talked about creating multiple accounts where you could have an administrator account and then you could have another account where you actually published all of your content from that account instead. This is a way you can help to keep your real administrator username secret by disabling the author pages, and just do not post any content using that administrator account, and then you won't have an author page, and that allows people to figure out your username if you have an author page for it. So that's why that part is important. Now I'm going to go ahead and save my changes here before I proceed on, and now I'm going to go over to the Advanced tab. On this tab, we're going to be doing things such as changing our admin username. I'm going to check this box, and it's going to allow me to rename my admin username to a different name. So I could just, for example, I'm going to type in admin and just a series of numbers, admin 91328. I won't end up using this as my true administrator password or my true administrator username for this site. I'll have to come back in and change it later on. But for the purposes of this demo, this will work out just fine. Feel free to make this something that does not contain the word admin in it though. You could just base it off of your name if you wanted to, or any other kind of a word that you would simply be able to remember, but it's not something that other people could commonly guess. So it'd be pretty hard for someone to figure out what this username was unless they could find it somewhere on my website. So that's why this gives me some added protection. I also want to change the ID of the user to make it not 1. If somebody got access to my database, they would be able to use that. If the ID was still 1, they could make some changes and essentially put them through as that user, even if they didn't have access to that account, as long as they could get into your database again. So it's just another layer of protection here. This is the WordPress salts. If you remember in previous lessons where I showed you the WP config file, and there were a number of salt keys in there, 8 of them actually, that I said you need to customize in order to unauthenticate all of the login cookies on your website. You can automatically change that here. If your site is ever compromised and you clean it, you'd want to go through and change all of your passwords, and then you could come back here and change your salts. I still recommend going ahead and changing them from the get-go though, just to make sure that they're not going to be any kind of a default value. Now this next part is a little tricky. Change the content directory. This is talking about the WP content directory of our WordPress website. Now in a lot of ways, this could be helpful to change, because when people are trying to target those vulnerabilities in the WordPress system, in a large majority of cases, I have seen that they're targeting the WP content folder. So in that regard, by customizing the name of the WP content folder and making it something else, you would certainly offer a deeper layer of protection to your website. However, you also need to consider whether or not this would break your website too. For example, let's say you already have content on this site. So you already have pages of information. If you had used the add media feature to upload an image and added that to your any page on your website, things like that are going to end up broken if you change this directory. So this is really only something that could be done, at least avoiding a lot of potential problems. You would want to do it when you first set up your website. The other problem that you can potentially run into is that not all WordPress themes and WordPress plugins are correctly programmed to account for a custom WP content directory name. This is unfortunately not as common in plugin and theme programming as some other things. So I have found, changing this directory on my site, I have found that it breaks some software that I've used on the website. And so I have to either decide, stick with the default directory or don't use particular pieces of software. To avoid problems, actually just end up going for the default value in a large majority of cases though. It's easier that way, and as long as I have all these other layers of protection, then this really shouldn't be that much of a concern for me. Now finally, we have changed the database prefix. Remember that WP underscore that I showed you in the WP config file and also referenced at the beginning of all the database tables, you can change that here by checking on this box, and it's going to generate a new prefix for you. So I simply save my changes, and now I should be all set to go. Once you do all this, though, you are going to end up most likely having to log back into your WordPress website, changing all these features, especially on this advanced page, can end up causing your previous login credentials to no longer be valid. And so you simply have to log back in again. As long as you're able to log back into your site at that point, then you should consider your security plugin installation to be successful, and this should now be protecting your website. Now, the very last thing that I want to point out with this iThemes security plugin is the log tab. On this tab, down under security log data, this will actually tell you when this plugin is protecting you. In particular, you will often see login attempts being made on your site, and it'll tell you what username they're trying to log in with. And host will list their IP address, for example. So it's going to give you some important data having to do with that. Ultimately, you don't necessarily need to worry about monitoring this too horribly much. However, if you have other real users or members on your website, I would recommend taking a look at this log data once a day or so for a week or two after you add this plugin onto your site, and just make sure that you're not somehow locking out real users of your website. That's really the biggest concern. Other than that, then this log data will simply help you to feel warm and fuzzy and know that the plugin is indeed keeping people from attacking your website in certain situations. I guess there was one final thing that I needed to mention. Once you remove the admin user from your website, do make sure you go back into your settings page. Nope, I believe I passed it. Here we go. Under the brute force protection section, you want to revisit and make sure you are immediately banning a host that attempts to log in with the admin username. This is going to be, again, the default username, and as long as you have now changed your username away from admin, then anybody that tries to log in with the admin username can be automatically banned. Just make sure you don't try to log in with that username yourself anymore if you do decide to make that change. This is one of the ways that people can find themselves locking themselves out of their own website. So do be careful about that, but this can drastically help to cut down the number of attempts that hackers are making trying to log into your site.